church here at this building to worship God in spirit and in truth. And we're encouraged by His Word to be here, so I encourage you all to be here. The speaker will be Mike Hickson, great gospel preacher, works at GBN, so it'll be great to hear him. And there's also a sign-up sheet in the foyer out there to have Mike over to your house or to a restaurant to go ahead and feed him dinner during those days. And I'm sure that maybe if you have opportunity, if you'd like to take up lunch, maybe if you're off on that day or whatever, I'm sure we'd be happy to join you. It'll be a great time of fellowship for us. August Bible readings are in the foyer, so we encourage you to take one of those. Ellabelle, a congregation there, sent us a letter. We gave them $1,000, I believe, to help get them on a new roof. They really needed it pretty bad. So we sent them $1,000, and they sent us a letter. It's back there in the foyer, thanking us for that, so I invite you to read that. Now for all the admins, I guess you could say. Of course, we all know about Brother Mark. Say we all do, but just talk to somebody and they didn't get the call. Evidently, sometime this afternoon, Mark fell. Not sure why. I haven't gotten any details. But when Riley called me about 2:30, he said they was on the way to the hospital in an ambulance. And you could tell that Riley was really rushed. His anxiety level was pretty high. So, fortunately, we don't know the situation there. But we want to remember him. Remember the doctors, Joanne's the doctor that she works for, the infectious doctor. Working with Mark, her name is Dr. Wynn, so remember her in prayers also so they can get this infection under control. And unfortunately, Michelle Quinlan is in the same situation with her foot. She has a staph infection. It's still going on. But thankfully, it's not MRSA. But keep her in your prayers. Like I say, anything we can do for these families, cards, letters, food, whatever they might ask us to do, we encourage each one of us to do what to help. And also talking to about Brother Ken this morning. He's just not feeling well, going through his chemo. Said he's eating okay, he just wasn't not feeling well, so we need to keep him in his prayers also. And also a friend of our family, the Blake family, they had a 5-month-old daughter. She was born with Down syndrome. And these people, wonderful people. Fortunately, it's not part of Lord's church, but you know how most people find out their kids got Down syndrome and they just want to get rid of them. These people said, no, we're going to take this child, we're going to raise this child. So, but they found out that the little guy's not that girl. Right? The little girl, she's going to have heart surgery. I put through an infant. So we want to keep that family, and especially the young one, in our prayers also. Any other announcements? Like I say, I got the phone call at about 2 o'clock that Brother Mark had the situation turned, and it was with his infection and things with his back. You know, it's always, it's like, got something prepared, David? It says, okay, well, I'll find something. So as I was going through, because I got a stack of sermon outlines about that thick, I was going through and figuring out what I want to preach on. And I began to think about you know, everything just seems to be, I mean, we have Brother Ken, so we've got Brother Mark who's having this situation, we've got Brother Michelle, these infections going on. It's kind of like, what in the world's going on? You know, as I was looking through, one sermon kind of hit me, I guess you would say, and it's entitled, and I'll kind of explain why. It says, don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. That's what I entitled it. And the reason why I bring this up is because in my limited experience, very limited compared to the world's experience. In my limited experience, it seems like these things that just keep snowballing, just keep happening, these traumatic events and so forth and so on, it begins to try heavy on people's hearts. And ultimately, if not dealt with in a spiritual and biblical way, it can lead to one falling away. And you might be sitting there as an audience this evening saying, well, you know, these situations are going to tear me away from my God. Well, I would caution us that might be considered a little bit arrogant on our part, because we never know. I don't know where I'm going to be at in 10 years. I will pray that I'm still faithful, but I really don't know. And so when things like this come up, turmoils, and things come up in our lives and things, we should always be humble enough to say, hey, this could take me away from my God, and I need to seriously contemplate that. And so we don't ever need to do that. If you have your Bibles, and I know you do, I'd like you to turn over to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. Just to give you a little bit of background, my understanding of the book of Hebrews, of course, we don't know who wrote it. But it seems, number one, it was written to Hebrews in and around Jerusalem at that time. And of course, as we study the book of Acts and the New Testament, the things that were going on, there's a couple of suggestions as to why this epistle was written specifically to them. The first one, and both of them kind of have their positives. The first one, it might be the fact that these Hebrews, when they lived under the Old Testament system, they had a structured religion. And what I mean by that is they had certain things that they had to do at certain times in their life. The sacrifices that they would have to go, the feasts that they would have to attend. At one point in the law, it said that only the males would go to Jerusalem and worship God 3 times a year. They had that kind of structure and things that they had to do. But when they became Christians, all that was lifted. Now we have liberty. And the suggestion is given that these people might have not been able to handle that liberty, and they wanted to go back to that kind of structured religion of the old law and do those things. And we can kind of see that in this epistle because he's writing, what's he primarily writing about? The superiority of what they're living in now. The superiority of Christ. The superiority of his sacrifice compared to the Old Testament sacrifice. The superiority of the priesthood, Christ's priesthood, as compared to the limited Levitical priesthood. And so that might be one suggestion. Another suggestion that has been told that this epistle is given to these to encourage them because of the persecution that they were enduring. As we read in the book of Acts, we know that the Jews were going out there, those who would say you've got to keep the old law, the old Mosaic system, sacrifice, especially circumcision, and they were getting on to the Christians. We read it in the book of Galatians and throughout the New Testament, the epistles that are written. And so you might have some individuals there around Jerusalem who said, we don't want to have this persecution. Let's just compromise and go back into the old Judaic system of the old law. And the Hebrew writer, again, is encouraging them not to do this. Now, there's a verse here, I know I told you, Mark Hebrews chapter 12. I want you to go ahead and mark Hebrews chapter 12 and just turn back a few chapters to Hebrews chapter 3 with me. I want to read beginning of verse number 7 here. And I think this really gives the essence of what this book is all about. It would begin here, wherefore, as the Holy Ghost saith, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in the day of provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. Wherefore I was grieved with that generation, and said, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. And notice verse number 12. This is the heeding, the warning that he gives. This is what your fathers did back in the old. You know all about what they did. Okay? He says, take heed, brethren. So he's talking to Christians. Lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. Basically, these Hebrews in and around Jerusalem were about ready to depart from God. And the reasoning behind it is because they had this evil heart of unbelief. Evil heart. And so he writes this epistle to encourage them, to show them, don't do this. Don't give up on Christianity. Don't give it up. Now again, back in Hebrews chapter 12, we'll begin. This is where our main points of our lesson will come from. We'll just read verses number 1 and 2, and then we'll go back and tear it apart. It says, wherefore, seeing we also are encompassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which does easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down on the right hand of the throne of God. The very first thing that we see, and what the Hebrew writer states, he says, wherefore, seeing also we are encompassed this about with so great a cloud of witnesses? Who's he talking about? Who's he talking about? We have to remember, always remember, that book, chapter, and verse, well actually chapter and verse, excuse me, man added that into it for our simplicity in finding certain things in the scriptures. They weren't there. They're not part of the original autographs that were done. And so when we talk about, in the context of what we're talking about here, that great cloud of witnesses is Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Fame of Faith that we call it. That's that great cloud of witnesses that he's talking about. And the interesting thing is when he says that they're compassed about, it means to be encircled about. The picture that you can look in your mind is that of a great stadium, a football stadium, basketball stadium, or whatever. And you have the football field or the court, that's the center of it, but then you have all those grandstands that are just all around, and they're capped with people looking down at that one center place. The idea here is that we, well, here for the writer, those Hebrews are there in the center court, and you have all this great cloud of witnesses are in the seats. That's what he's talking about. Now, it's not like, now, if any analogy, there are certain quirks that we need to clarify. And the interesting thing about this is, they're not necessarily looking down on us. Okay, that's not what's happening. You know, when you look in the Old Testament, turn back with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Ecclesiastes chapter 9. And read verses number 5 and 6. You're going to say, for the living. Well, let's go up to verse number 4 to get more context. You say, for to him that is joined to all the living, there is hope. So we have living, there is hope. For the living dog is better than the dead lion. So he's contrasting the living and the dead. He says, for the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything. Neither have they any more a reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. The dead, and they're not looking towards death because it's already happened. Go on and say, also their love and their hatred, their envy is now perished. They don't have those things. The dead don't have those things. Neither have they any more, notice this, a portion forever in anything that is done under the sun. You have individuals out there who say that, you know, the angels are looking down on us. My understanding of what verse 6, especially the latter part of verse number 6 is, dead don't know what we're doing. They don't see us. You look at Luke chapter 16, 19 to 31, the rich man and Lazarus. Okay? The rich man, okay, he knew what his brothers were up to. But it's not like he's looking at them and saying, you see what my brothers are doing? The dead don't know what we're doing. So the great cloud of witnesses that is being talked about, they're not looking down on us, watching us. What it really means is that we are down here in the same court and we're looking up at this vast spectrum of witnesses, all the Old Testament figures, and we see them. How do we see them? Through the eyes of faith and through the eyes of the Word of God. That's what he's talking about here when we, this great cloud of witnesses, more than witnesses telling us. When we look at them and look at their lives through the spectacle, if you will, of Scripture. So they say, don't give up. Don't you ever give up. It is worth it to keep going. It is worth it to endure. It is worth it to be patient. It's worth it to do this. So don't ever give up. He would say there again in verse number 1 of Hebrews chapter 12. And he said, let us lay aside every weight and every sin which is easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Several times in the Scriptures, the Christian life that we live here upon the earth is compared to a race. It's compared to a race. Just a couple of verses. Go over to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Beginning right in verse number 24. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Beginning in verse number 24. Paul would write, know ye not that they which run in a race run all? But one receiveth his prize, so run that they may attain. And every man that striveth for the master is temperate in all things. He's talking about physical races. You know, the Romans, they used to have all their little sporting events and races and everything else. He's saying here is in those races here upon the earth, everybody's racing, but you only have one winner. Everybody else loses. He would go on to say, every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, the reward at the end of the race, but we, plural, incorruptible. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly, so fight I, not as one that beateth the air, I keep under my body and bring it to the test, lest by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself shall be found. The difference between the race here upon the earth, Christian way, and that's why I kind of emphasize that word "we" there in verse number 25, is that in the Christian race, there can be multiple winners. It's whoever finishes that crossing line and has those words spoken to them, well done, thou good and faithful servant, you're the winner. Along with Sister Joanne, Brother Chris, everybody who names the name of Christ and is obedient to his will and is faithful until death, we win that race. We win that race, but there's several things that we need to consider when we're talking about this race. Number one, this is not a sprint. It is not a sprint. You know, Carl Lewis, man, he would take off 9 seconds, he was done. But you compare that to marathon. You know, I think they've gotten the marathon, last time I looked, was like 2 hours and 9 minutes. I don't know how people can run it. It's amazing, but they can. That's a long race. That's a long time to be running. The Christian race is like a marathon. It takes endurance to keep going. It takes it. And we must endure to the end if we want to have that crown. And these witnesses that we're talking about, that we're looking at through the eyes of faith, they confirm this. You consider back in Hebrews chapter 11, and just go back to one chapter, Abraham. He is one of those in Hebrews chapter 11, beginning in verse number 8. And say, by faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out to a place which he should after receive an inheritance, obeyed, and went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. We'll go back to the Old Testament with this. There was a land promised given to Abraham. God's going to give it to you. So he goes, not knowing where it's going to be. God's going to leave him. And when he finally gets there, guess what he gets to do? Does he get to build this big mansion and everything else and just no. Lived in a town of tents. He didn't possess the land like we were thinking. But he did it by faith. He went and he did it by faith. He endured. And ultimately, what happened with that land? Given to the nation of Israel. They had it. They had it. He endured. You consider Noah in Hebrews chapter 11 there, verse number 7. He says, by faith Noah, when warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. How long did it take Noah to build that ark? Take 5 minutes? You know, I worked at the boatyard and main ship before it closed back in 07. You know, we would have a new boat out in 3 days. In 3 days, we'd roll a new boat out. Now, of course, there were stages, so it probably took a month from the beginning of the process to the end to put the boat out. It took more than 100 years to build this one. It took some endurance. That took some faith. We have to endure as we go on. And all these individuals that we read about in Hebrews chapter 11 show us this. It's where did Noah go? After he got done building the ark, he went in the ark and saved his family. Him and his family were saved. It's worth it. Don't give up. It's worth it. Look over in Hebrews chapter 10, verse number 36, to kind of put another caveat, if you will, into this idea of our endurance. You saw, for ye have need of patience, that after ye have done the will of God, ye might receive the promise. Another thing that we need to understand about this race and the endurance that we need to have patience. We need to have patience in what we're doing. We're getting ready for a lectureship, and Riley gave me the minor prophet Habakkuk. certain things that God has told us in His Word. One of them, be thou faithful unto death, I'll give you eternal life. Even if it costs you your life, you die, but you're going to get the reward, like we've been talking about. We're going to finish that race, we're going to get the reward. But it takes endurance. And with that endurance, we need patience. It's not just going to happen like that. Again, we look at that, the Hebrews chapter 11 there, that great cloud of witnesses that we're looking at. Each one of them, when we look at it, patience. Patience. Moses had patience. Talk about Noah and Abraham. All of those great men of faith. Patience that we have to do. But the interesting thing in verse number 36 is there's an order to this. We say again, for you have need of patience that after you have done the will of God, then you receive. That's why we have to have patience. We have to do the will of God first before we have that reward. That takes patience. All right? That takes patience. So we need to endure. We need to have patience. Again, back in Hebrews chapter 12, we'll continue on. Another thing that we see here is self-examination. Self-examination. That's again in verse number 1. He would say, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth easily beset us. Which doth easily beset us. Now, as I've studied this, and this is my thoughts on this verse and what it's teaching, that weight and sin, some people put those together, but I kind of look at it as they're two separate things. Mainly because there's a comma there after weight. So it appears to me to be two separate things, and I think there's some logic to that. When we think about the weight, which does not easily beset us, the thought comes to my mind in a metaphor, I guess you would say, that of ankle weights. Now, I know ankle weights, they don't sell them anymore, at least I don't think so. So some of you might not even know what they are, but they were basically sandbags that you put around your ankle when you were out training for races. And basically what it would do was weigh down your legs, so as you're training, you would have more resistance, build your legs up, make them stronger, make you faster, so forth and so on. Of course, they did away with them because they found out that they were injuring people, but that's probably why they found them. But the difference with that is, okay, in that type of atmosphere here upon the earth, you take those weights off when you get in a race. You don't want to have them weights on you when you're actually in that race. Because they're just going to slow you down. There's going to be a hindrance. You're not going to win. I think that's kind of like the thought and the idea that we can apply here, this weight that he's talking about. It's things that aren't necessarily sinful, okay, that we have in our life. Is it sinful to watch football? NASCAR. Is it sinful to watch a NASCAR race? No, there's nothing sinful about that. But it can become a weight which can beset us if it begins to take priority over my service to God. Then it becomes a serious issue. So I'm sitting there, I'll use racing because I used to watch racing a lot, especially Dale Earnhardt. So Dale Earnhardt, he's out there in Talladega one day, and he's cooking up the track. He's just going around, he's passing everybody. In fact, that happened, I might get it wrong, back in maybe 99 or 2000. He was going around that track, and he was like in 13th place, 2 laps left, and boy, he got behind something, and they just took off and he won the race. But I'm watching him, he's going around, and I know service is coming up. Man, it's a great race. He's coming on, he's coming on. It'll be okay. That's a weight that can be set. I'm putting that before my service to God. If that's the situation, and this can happen with anything, our relationships. We have, well, I know of one, I use my family for an example, in the relationship that he has. My sister-in-law is married to somebody who is not part of the faith, who in fact is very antagonistic, if you will, to the faith. Okay? That can be a weight if, and thankfully right now it's not, in fact she's very stubborn, and she won't let it, I know that for a fact, but that can become a weight that can come between me and God. So what do? The Hebrew writer tells us to shut it off. my love for NASCAR begins to impede with my life, my service to God, I got to get rid of it. My relationship, that's a hard one. My relationship, if it begins to impede on my relationship and service to God, I got to get rid of it. That's tough. That's tough. But this is what the Hebrew writer is telling these individuals. Get rid of it. It's not worth it. You know, Brother Mark this morning was talking for a minute about what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5 there. If your eye offends thee, get rid of it. It's better to enter into heaven, halt, than to go be whole and go to eternal Gehenna. It's worth it. It's worth it to give those things up. But then he talks about that sin. The sin. Like I say, I believe that these are two different things. And the sin that I think we're talking about here is not the sin that we might find ourselves in. We're living our life, a temptation comes up, and just because of the flesh, we fall into it, and it's just a bad thing. I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think the sin that he's talking about, especially in the context of this book, it's like what we would call today as pet sins. Those things that we know it's wrong, but it's okay. I can do that. I can do that. I think that's what he's talking about. Back in Psalm chapter 10, it's interesting. Psalm chapter 10. The psalmist lists three things that can go through an individual's heart and their mind when they have those little pet sins. They say, oh, and it's interesting the way he describes it, and the individual that he describes. The first one, excuse me, I have to get to my page and not paying attention. Yeah. Psalm chapter 10 and verse number 6. Actually, go up to verse number 4, and then we'll hit verse number 6. He says, the wicked, through the pride of his countenance, will not seek after God. God is not in all his thoughts. Okay, so he's talking about wicked people. And my question to you is, are there wicked people in the Lord's church? Well, let's continue. Look at verse number 6. He, the wicked person, has said in his heart, I shall not be moved, for I shall never be in adversity. Pride. We have pride in the Lord's church today. We have individuals that pride. Yes. Yes, we do. Our wickedness. Move down to verse number 11. He, the wicked, has said in his heart, this is a good one, God hath forgotten. He hideth his face, he will never see it. How many of us think, and with our little pet sins, nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to see it. That's why it's the idea here is. Well, guess what? There's always going to be. You're never alone. When you study Psalm Psalm 138, okay, and he talks about there where God is. In certain aspects he talks about, I can go up as far in the heavens as I can. And what's his conclusion? You're there. Then he talks about you can go as deep as you want to. I can take a submersible and go to a Marianas Trench to the deepest part of this earth. Pitch black. And I think, finally I'm alone. And guess what? Guess who's there? God Almighty. His omnipresence. He is always there. There is absolutely nothing that is hid from him. I believe it's in Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4. Just make sure of my reference here. Yeah, verse number 13. Hebrew I would say, neither is there any creature that is not manifest in his sight, but all things are naked and open unto the eyes of him with whom we have to do. Nothing hid from God. Pet sins that we have and the excuses that we try to make here, God will never see it. We're wrong. We need to shut it off. We need to get rid of that pet sin because God does see. The third thing that we see in Hebrew, Psalm 10 is verse number 13. He says, wherefore doth the wicked contemn God? He has said in his heart, now will not require it. What's he saying there? Some people, when they have those little pet sins, they're not going to be judged. That's really when we have these things in our life, these little pet sins, that we don't want to get rid of. Really what we have is what we discussed earlier in Hebrews chapter 3, verse number 12, an evil heart of unbelief. I don't believe what you said, God. about judgment. I don't believe what you said, God, that you see all things. That's what it is. We need to get rid of those things. We need to get rid of those things so we can run that race that we need to race. Or we need to win, excuse me.